That's right. Maryland had its first Republican senators. I don't think you need their names for any particular reason, but I just knew if we were in class together, one of you awesome people would say, "What were the Republican senators' names, Professor?" And now we know. George Wellington, the Republicans appointed as soon as they got into statewide office, because Gorman's seat didn't expire until 1898. So there was 2 years of everybody on the Republican side just eagerly awaiting the moment when Gorman would be out and his Republican replacement would take place in the next year, 1899. Take office, rather. That's Louis McComas, 1899. That means Maryland's next open U.S. Senate seat will come after the next elections. We'll see if the Republicans are back in office, they may send Wellington back. If the Democrats return, they may go a different direction. Now, the fact that the Republicans have taken control of Maryland was remarkable. Republicans generally got 40 to 45% of the statewide vote. And Maryland's Republicans pulled this off in the context of Democratic dominance across the rest of the South. Now remember earlier we talked about that period of Reconstruction. After the Civil War, where the 14th and 15th Amendments were passed, the 14th Amendment, most important part you need right here to make sure you have in your brain, the 14th Amendment said that no state could deny any person, the equal protection of the laws. The 15th Amendment said that neither the federal government nor any state could deprive or limit a citizen's right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. I say those things slowly to make sure that you either have them in your brain or have them written down once again, because you'll need them to understand what's happening across the rest of the South and to understand the next arc of Maryland's history that we're going to go through here. Should I say them again? Do you want me to say them again? Okay, but this time quickly. The 14th Amendment, that no state can deny any person the equal protection of the laws. And the 15th Amendment, that neither the federal government nor any state can deny or limit a citizen's right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And during the period of Reconstruction, the federal government made real effort to back those amendments. And that's when hundreds of black men were elected to office across the former Confederate states. There were black men in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. But after 1877, facing Ku Klux Klan violence and terrorism across the South, violence that attacked the Republican Party generally and black Republican voters specifically. Faced with this violence and terrorism, the federal government backed away. The federal government backed away from supporting black people's rights in the South, and the Republican Party backed away from supporting black people's rights in the South. Backed away is a good way to think of it, because it didn't just end abruptly for every single Republican, but they backed away. And as support at the federal level for black people's rights in the South diminished. The Democrats, also known as the white supremacists of the South, embarked on a campaign to create a new system of white supremacy that would end the relative black progress of Reconstruction. The key parts of this new system that Democrats built in the South are segregation, disfranchisement, and lynching. And now let's take those in reverse order of the way I just said them. Lynching were public murders, they still are if they happen, public murders conducted outside the law. Mobs would seize black people in the South and publicly murder them, sometimes in mass gatherings that attracted thousands of people, advertised in newspapers, special trains bringing people to watch, sometimes slowly roasting people for hours. From 1880 to 1900, that's the last 20 years of the 1800s. During that 20-year period, on average, a black person was lynched in the South every other day. A lynching every other day on average for a 20-year period. And almost never were any of the murderers, the lynchers, brought to any kind of justice. We'll talk more about lynching in Maryland at the end of this section. While lynching was at its peak, a way of reinforcing white supremacy, showing black people in the South, the law doesn't protect you. At the same time, Southern Democrats passed laws or new constitutional amendments or whole new constitutions designed to take away black men's right to vote without explicitly violating the 15th Amendment. You remember what the 15th Amendment says, right? You can't take away someone's right to vote because of race, color, or previous servitude. So Southern states passed poll taxes, which said that you had to pay to vote. Actually, you had to pay to register to vote. And literacy tests, so that you had to be able to read and write in order to register to vote. Now, in both cases there, clearly, those are going to affect some white men too. Not as many white men as black men, because black people are disproportionately poor and denied access to education, but are still going to disfranchise some white men. In states where they didn't want to disfranchise those white men, they created community funds to pay the poll tax for the poor white men. And they passed laws that said that if you couldn't read and write, that's okay. The registrar will read to you, and you just have to explain it to the registrar. And the registrar decides whether your explanation is good enough or not. The registrar, the guy who registers you to vote, is, in this system, always a white Democrat. So the black guy can give a good explanation, and it's not going to be good enough for the registrar. Where the illiterate white man can say, I think you just said something about white supremacy. And the registrar can say, you are registered to vote, my friend. Some states also passed laws that allowed the registrar to give tests at the registrar's discretion. So if the registrar looks at you and thinks, you need to tell me the name of every county in the state, the registrar can make you do that. And then the next person who steps up, no test. Now, clearly, this is all rigged to try to take the right to vote away from black men, without explicitly saying that's what they were doing. In 1896, the Supreme Court issued their ruling in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. And the court ruled that it was legal, constitutional, for states to separate black and white people with inferior facilities. That black and white people could, by state law, be forced to ride in separate parts of the train, go to separate public schools, sit in separate parts of the theater, ride in separate parts of the streetcar, all these things. The court said that equal, as the word was used in the 14th Amendment, didn't actually mean, equal. What it meant was existence. So the phrase that came from Plessy versus Ferguson was separate but equal. And that might mislead you and you might think that, oh, they separated black and white people, but the things were equal, separate but equal. No. Because the court had said that equal only meant that it had to exist. Like if it exists for white people and it exists for black people, it counts as equal. So if white people get to sit in all the best seats in the theater and black people get to sit in the worst seats, it counts as equal because they both get to be in the theater. Alright, so all of this was happening further south in the same period where up in Maryland in the 1890s, the Republicans control the state government. So the Democrats' strategy in Maryland to try to get political power back was to use the playbook that was working in the rest of the South, to try to frighten Maryland's white people about what black political power might mean. This is part of the strategy. There was this whole conspiracy idea that the mayor of Baltimore, William Malster, was in cahoots with Baltimore's black leaders to appoint black people for potential inclusion in the legislature in Baltimore. Oh my goodness. Now, of course, black people wanted more political power. They were about, they're about close to 20% of Maryland's population, and they vote Republican because the other party hates them, which means they're about 40%, 40-some percent of Maryland's Republican voters. And yet, they held no statewide political office. The white Republicans who run the Republican Party generally don't want to even acknowledge that black Republicans exist because they fear that doing so will turn more white Marylanders into Democrats. So this campaign, through the press, through Democratic politicians, said that black people voting had led to a surge, that black people voting and Republicans governing Maryland had led to a surge in crime from black Marylanders. And that strategy crime and fears of racial equality meant that in the 1899 elections, the Democrats retook statewide political power. We'll talk more about that in the next video, but I can tell you now, I don't think you need to write these guys' names down. Saved you, didn't I?